Hi
everyone.
Morning everyone.
Morning.
Just waiting for people to come in and we'll get started. Hey, morning. Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jenny, and I'm one of the conveners of the English Australia Action Research Special Interest Group. And I'm here with my colleagues, Natalie, Paul, and Sophie. And today we're going to talk about action research in ELT. And we will focus on how to explore, why to explore, and what to explore. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the English Australia program and also action research more generally. So to give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover in this workshop today, we're going to talk to you about what action research is. So if you are already familiar with action research, this will be a good review for you. And if you're not sure, this will give you a brief introduction. We're going to talk about the English Australia program timeline very briefly as well, and also what action research isn't, and some important things for you to think about. We'll talk briefly about how to apply for the EA program if you're interested in that. And we're going to have some participation as well. So get ready to speak to your colleagues in the second half of the workshop today. We're going to be generating some ideas for potential projects. And hopefully at the end, we'll have plenty of time for any questions you might have as well. So I'm going to kick us off with a warmer to get our brains going this morning. I want you to think about your classroom. What current learning or teaching issues have you observed that you would like to explore or address? I'd love for you to put some ideas in the chat. What current learning or teaching issues have you observed that you'd like to explore or address? Anything, either explore formally or informally. Any ideas you have? For me, it's teaching pronunciation online. That's the thing I'm still working on. Classic, Sophie. I feel like that's one. Yeah. Reading and writing online. Reading online for sure. Trying to get feedback from students when you're monitoring them reading. Assessment. Yeah, assessment and assessment security maybe is something that I've been thinking about a lot as well. Yeah. Breakout rooms, Sophie, on your mind there. Authenticity, assessment authenticity. Yeah. Well, I'm going to share with you, motivating students. Well, okay. So I'm going to share with you an issue from a colleague in Swinburne. I don't know if any of you know Ashley Starford. So Ashley took part in the English Australia Action Research Program in 2020. And this was an issue that he noticed in his classroom. Despite the efforts of teachers to foster interactivity, engagement remains a thorny issue, as does how teachers can best use blended learning modes to attenuate low engagement. Now, I don't know about you, I've certainly had this experience as well. How might you address this issue? in your classroom? Just take a minute to think, and if you have an idea, again, you can share it in the chat. Thorny issue, I think, is a really good way to describe this one.
Yes.
Mhm. Interesting that some of us mentioned engagement and motivation that we've noticed in our own classrooms. Okay, well, I'm going to be using Ashley's project as an example this morning to talk about, because I think it's a current issue for us in 2021 and 22. And it gives us a good way to see how action research happens. So I'll tell you how Ashley decided to address this issue very soon. So you can compare how he addressed it to the way you might address this in your classroom. So everyday teaching, what might you do to address this? Well, discuss it with colleagues potentially. I've put virtual in brackets there. I find it more difficult to discuss things with colleagues now in my virtual staff room, but that might be something you would discuss together. You might ask someone for help, a mentor or a coordinator. Perhaps you just try a number of different approaches, see which ones work, experiment, do some research, look in a magazine, a journal article, try and find out some more about the theory behind the issue that you're having, or something else. So the question that we're going to ask today is, how is action research different to this really normal process that teachers go through every day? So here's a quote from Anne Burns's book, Doing Action Research in English Language Teaching. And she says, action research is a self-reflective, critical, and systematic approach to exploring the issue that you notice in your classroom. For me, the word systematic is really important here. It's going a step further than the actions you might take to explore something every day in your classroom. So in action research, you would develop a specific research question and collect some data as evidence to try and answer your question. Probably a step further than most of us would do in our everyday teaching. So perhaps you've seen this diagram before. Anne Burns uses it when she talks about action research. This is the action research cycle from Chemmis and McTaggart. And this is the theory behind the cycles of action research. So action research happens in a plan, act, observe, reflect cycle, where you would plan what you are going to do. You would act, so you would try out your activity, implement your approach in your classroom, observe what happens, and then reflect on what that means. Anne usually mentions how this spiral is going downwards. I always remember that about her presentations. Hopefully our action research would be more of a progress rather than a downward spiral. So what does this look like in real life? So when you plan, you explore an issue in your classroom and read about theories or research and make a plan about what you're going to do. So to go back to Ashley Starford, with his issue with his unengaged students, he looked at his classroom and he noticed what he thought was going on. He noticed that his students were seemed to be dependent on their teacher, that they were unengaged with what was happening every day in class. That seemed to be higher in the EAP, in the English for Academic Purposes classrooms. So he thought, okay, I need to explore what activities are going to encourage my students to be more engaged. So he focused on the word meaningful, and he did some research around what meaningful means and what a meaningful activity is. And his plan was to try and use some meaningful activities in class, and he's teaching online. This was in 2020, to try and engage his students. And he planned, and then he implemented this plan. So when you act, you implement your activity or approach. And he did 3 cycles of research. So in the first cycle, he used reflective activities in class to try and get students to reflect on the importance or the meaning of what they had done. And in later cycles, he did more investigation into the kind of tasks students do independently outside of class, because his idea was, well, students might choose independent activities that are meaningful for them. So that would be useful for me to explore and provide more independent activities for students. And then he observed what happened. So the observation part of this cycle is collecting data on the effectiveness of your activity or approach. And so he decided to use questionnaires. He collected demographic data about his students. He also interviewed them, and both in the middle and at the end of the cycle. And the idea was he was getting his students' perspective on what meaningful means and how they feel about engagement in the classroom. And then he looked at all the data he collected over his 3 cycles. He tried to draw some conclusions, and at the end of each cycle, used those conclusions to plan another cycle. So you can see that this looks very clean and tidy, this cycle here, but it doesn't always happen like this in practice, as you can no doubt imagine. But for him, when he looked back at what he thought originally about engagement in class, he actually found some really surprising insights into his students' ideas about what meaningful means. So his students really valued any kind of engagement with their teacher. So anything where students could develop their relationship with their teacher, or anything interactive, students really put value on that activity as being meaningful. And they also really enjoyed competition, but not necessarily gamification. And these were interesting observations, and interesting for Ashley to reflect on. So I don't know if any of you know Ashley. I don't know him, but when I was reading his summary again to get inspiration for this workshop today, I really enjoyed seeing how he had found these surprising results from his research, and just the act of collecting data from his students and looking at their perspective had given him some insights into his classroom that he didn't have before. All right, I'm going to hand over to Paul now, who's going to talk to you about what action research doesn't involve. Paul.
Yeah, and I guess the main reason for talking about this is when I first started the program, I guess I had some misconceptions about what action research was, and even reading through, you know, okay, I understand I need a plan, I act, observe, reflect. One of the first things that I started to do was do a bit of background research, and I sort of got a little bit off track, and I started thinking, well, hold on, what am I doing? What is the difference between action research and other forms of research? So to answer this question, Jenny, Anne Burns mentions that action research does not set out to prove or disprove anything. And I thought this was actually really relieving, because in the back of my mind, I was like, how can I prove that what I'm saying is true? How do I provide any evidence that what I am observing in class is actually true in other contexts? But in fact, we don't need to do that. We don't need to set up these control and experimental groups or do pre-test and post-test kind of methodology, which would take a lot of time and requires a much more in-depth process to get that kind of proof. Whereas instead, the proof comes from what we observe in class, what we see in class, what we see in our students. And that means that there is that limiting aspect. We can't really say that, you know, a statistical analysis of 10 students is generalizable to the entire population of ELICOS students. Instead, our findings are not going to be generalizable. However, they can give some evidence or some indication that what you're researching is significant and could be helpful to other people who are in a similar context. But it's not this same sort of exploratory research that we see in scientific or experimental traditions of research in universities. Okay, so the other aspect that I thought was really interesting is that fit between everyday teaching and university teaching. So what we do every day, very practical. We have rapid reflection, which is also, Anne Burns says, is reflection in action. So while you're actually doing it, we're reflecting on what's happening in our classrooms when we're doing activities with students. And so, however, this is, it doesn't really contribute much to a body of research, right? Instead, what we do is we often share this with our teachers in a meeting. On the other extreme, you have university research, which is very in-depth, where we're using quantitative and qualitative methods of inquiry. And yes, it does contribute to journal articles. Action research fits in the middle of that. It's quite a practical focus, but however, it's still systematic. It's not just looking at what we do every day. Instead, we're reflecting on action. So at the end of a cycle or at the end of an activity, we reflect on what actually occurred during class. And that's something that teachers often don't have time to do. If you're teaching 200 hours, we can't reflect on every 200 hours that we're teaching. And yes, this can be really helpful to university researchers who want to go more in depth. Okay. The other aspect that I was thinking of is, well, you know, when you've decided, yes, I want to get started, I've got an idea, this is something I'm passionate about, I want to explore action research in my own context. What do you need to think about before you get started? So a couple of things here, your institution. So every institution is different. You'll need to talk to your manager first. You'll need to think about what resources you need. So if you're going to look at something like assessments, do you have access to those assessments? Do you have perhaps somebody in your organization who manages assessments? Will you need to negotiate or talk with them in order to make any changes to those assessments, for example? We also need to think about students. How many students are you likely to have during the year? Will there be a possibility of having a large class, or will you have to make do with small classes, things like that? Collaboration is important because if you come from a school where you have a co-teacher, you might want to think about whether or not you talk to your co-teacher or talk to another teacher at your institution about doing your research project together. So looking for a co-researcher. Some people prefer to do it individually, however. So there's always some considerations there about your own preference as well as you know, what's best. Supervision-wise, in the Action Research Program, we're so lucky to have somebody like Anne Burns who can give us that supervision. But if you're going to go out alone and do it with your own institution, you have to think about who who is there that could supervise what you're doing and provide you with some advice about how to tackle some of the more trickier aspects. You also get a lot of good advice from other people in the program when you join up with English Australia's Action Research Program. Ethics approval within your own institution. You'll need to think about things like consent forms. If you're going to do some interviews or take video content or any audio content, you'll need ethics approval about how you're going to manage that content, where it will be stored, privacy issues, things like that. So therefore, in most institutions, you need at least 2 months before you get started. Now, if you're just starting a course right now, it's not likely that you'll be able to do your action research project with this class that you're teaching. So therefore, you kind of have to think ahead and think about what you're going to be doing in the future. However, that's kind of taken care of within the Action Research Program with English Australia, which is another really good positive aspect of the program. Finally, I won't go on too much about this, but also, how are you going to share your findings? Are you going to be presenting at a conference? Will you be running some workshops or writing something on a blog? So teachers often want to share their classroom experience, but once again, we need to get permission before we can share things that our students have done in classrooms, especially if it's video and audio content. Thanks, Jenny.
Hi guys, nice to see you on here. I'm Natalie. I'll just run through a little bit about the Action Research Program through English Australia and how to apply. So before doing that, there are some benefits to participating in the Action Research Program, both on the college side and on the participant side. So why should colleges participate? It's highly beneficial for colleges to participate, as you can see, there have been comments in the past that it strengthens teachers' concepts of practice and professional development, increased interest in and engagement with teacher-initiated research, developed a sense of professionalism related to awareness of a wider world within and outside the organisation. And it generally contributes to the organisation and teachers working there as a whole as well. So it is a good thing to take part of from a managerial aspect as well, to encourage teachers to participate and support as much as you can in that role as well. So the benefits to participate in action research for individual teachers, why should teachers participate? There are various reasons, and all past participants in the program report that they've gained considerably from the opportunity to explore an area of interest to them, to develop their professionalism and also engage with other teachers who are passionate about teaching. So it is a process that you will share with your colleagues and cultivate a kind of teaching that in your professionalism as well. Some comments from past participants were that some quotes from them were that it was a profound experience both professionally and personally. It's taught me a lot about excuse me, myself as a teacher, and has given me a deeper insight into the way students learn. Great professional development and a springboard for further opportunities. It's a wonderful opportunity to take a look at research in a practical way. It is also good to meet other practitioners and to hear about other centres. It's a supercharged professional development experience. So by looking at that, we're going to jump into how to apply for the program. There's couple of ways that you could access the information, and one way is through the English Australia website, through the Action Research section, and it's referenced there in the slide. And also there was an email announcement on Wednesday, the 24th of November. You would have received the expression of interest email, and you can also access the information through there as well. So the 2022 program is open, and it's applications must be submitted by 5 p.m. Friday, the 28th of January 2022. So just to go through the timeline, I'll just pass back over to Jen for that.
So we understand some of you might not be interested in participating in the EA program, but this timeline will anyway will give you a good idea of what an action research project might look like over a year. So as Nat just said, the deadline for expressions of interest in the EA program is the 28th of January. Participants will be notified mid-February. And then the program itself is structured around 3 workshops. So the first workshop happens earlier in the year, that kind of March, April time. And then after this workshop, you would start your project and work on your project and keep working on it up to and beyond workshop 2. And workshop 2 is there kind of at the beginning of, at the end of June or into July, and that's where you would write up what you've done so far and summarize your research so far as well. And keep working up until workshop 3, where you would finalize your research outcomes. This one is later in the year. And you would also prepare to present your action research at the Action Research Colloquium, and also submit your final report. So as Paul mentioned earlier, it provides a lot of structure if you haven't participated in an action research project before. But even if you weren't interested in this program itself, this is a really good framework to use as guiding you to conduct a project. All right. So Nat, am I back to you now?
Yeah. So just to apply for the program, you just need to do a couple of things. And one of those is to send a 500-word outline of your expression of interest that aligns with the 2022 research theme, along with the application form. And that's just a snapshot from the EA website, but you can also access the form through the email that was sent on Wednesday, or directly through the English Australia website, and just send that through to Sophie at her email address there. So that's the 500-word outline plus the application form. So for the under general terms, there is eligibility criteria, but I'll just pass on to Sophie to talk more about that.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Sophie and I'm the Professional Development Manager at English Australia. So in terms of the eligibility criteria for people who are interested in taking part in the program, a teacher who wants to take part has to work for any English language program at a centre. So it needs to be ELICOS related. But it can be an English Australia member college or non-member college. So it can be any type of ELICOS college in Australia. One of our criteria, you'll see the second one, is that participants must be employed under contract for the period of the program, which is March to September 2022. However, we realise that at the moment with the ELICOS sector in flux, that employment conditions might be a little different for teachers at the moment. So if you don't have a contract for the period of the program, that's fine. Just send me an email. However, you will need to have a guarantee from your Director of Studies that you will have teaching time and enough teaching time from March to September to be able to undertake the program. So it's because it's a research program, you will need a class to undertake the research with. So that's why we have that criteria. But if you're not sure, just send me an email. We can have a further chat about it. If you're interested, TAFE is eligible. So it just depends what program you TAFE. So again, if it's like an AMEP program, that's not strictly eligible, but send me an email. Foundation programs aren't, you know, technically eligible, but if they're like an English academic support course in a foundation program, then it may be eligible, but we can have a discussion around it. So we're being a little bit more flexible with the criteria at the moment. Obviously, you have to have the support and approval of your DOS. And then there's this criteria that projects can't be contributing towards postgraduate studies because you get so much support and you know, collaboration from your colleagues throughout the program. We didn't feel that it was fair that they could also contribute to postgrad study. However, if it's some research on some study that you did in the past, that's fine. We also say that to apply, it can be a maximum of 2 teachers on 1 project. We do recommend doing it in pairs. In the past, people who've taken part have found it really helpful to have a pair. Of course, if you're just an individual, that's fine as well, but we won't take applications for 3 researchers on the 1 project. It's 1 project per college per year. So if we get expressions from 2 separate teachers who work at the same college, we will have to choose between the projects. And then finally, people who are interested in taking part can't have already taken part in the Action Research Program before. Yep, so Svetlana, if it's an AMEP program, it's not eligible. But if you sort of teach AMEP sometimes and ELICOS sometimes, then shoot me an email. But yeah, it is an Action Research in ELICOS program. I'm going to pop my email into the chat there. Happy to have further conversations with people.
Okay, so just thanks, Sophie. So just to jump over to the research theme for 2022, the research theme is current issues in ELICOS teaching and learning. So just to touch on what Sophie mentioned, that with, you know, there's a little bit more flexibility for 2022 program in eligibility, and also in the theme. It's quite broad, as mentioned on the website. It's quite broad to allow for, you know, the unpredictability that might come in 2022. So some key areas that you could hone in on within that theme could include technology enhanced learning, materials development, student or teacher well-being, student engagement and community building, adapting to online teaching and learning, feedback and assessment, learner autonomy, and teacher involvement and reflection. It's not limited to any of these. These are just suggestions to get your thoughts going.
Right, and thinking back to what we said, what everyone was writing in the chat at the beginning, I think everything that we suggested could fit into this theme in some way. So we thought it would be of great benefit to us today as a group of teachers coming together to spend some time exploring this theme. So here it is again, current issues in ELICOS teaching and learning. We're going to spend some time in breakout rooms now. And like Sophie said earlier, checking engagement in breakout rooms can be challenging. So I hope that's something you will bear in mind when I put you in these breakout rooms today. We're going to spend, looking at the time, 15 to 20 minutes talking together and exploring this issue. So I've got some prompts here from Anne Burns to get us talking. So this is some of the ways you could find your broad area of focus for your research. Thinking, what do you feel passionate about? Maybe what new approaches are you interested in trying? What needs of your students aren't being met? Why are your students behaving in the way that they do? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms in a moment. If you'd like to remember these, please take a photo of the screen now so that you can keep them in your mind. Like I said, we're going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes talking this over. And when I bring everyone back into the main room, we're going to really briefly get some feedback about the kind of topics that you were exploring in groups. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And okay, give me a moment. Hello everyone, welcome back. So sorry to interrupt all of your discussions. I could see by no one coming back that you were all probably busy in discussion. I'd love to hear what you were talking about. The group I dipped into, Manuel and Magda, you were talking about gamification, is that right?
Yeah, gamification.
Is it like arising from any particular issue that you're experiencing? Because I didn't catch the beginning of your discussion.
Oh yeah, I think it was about the all of the opportunities that are in that area, and I think Magda also mentioned she's been interested in that for a while, and then I also said that I thought it was really, really interesting because for engagement, it's just a fantastic way to, facilitate learning without really focusing on the learning.
And Nat, in your room, what were your team talking about?
Yeah, so Sharon and Nigella, we were we were talking about a few topics, and especially around students engaging or not engaging in online classes, and just Sharon came up with some great points. Sharon, do you want to share a little bit?
I don't think I came up with any great points, but sure, I'll still share. I think actually Nigella came up with a great point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that kind of, we were talking about, and I was talking about a particular class. I mean, there are probably a couple of things. I was talking about a particular class I'm dealing with right now, and the fact that I'm saying that they won't respond enough to my liking, but what I really mean is that they won't respond verbally. They will respond in chat, and they will respond to a certain degree. If I call their name, they're going to find an answer. But I'm sort of looking for some of that, sometimes some of that feedback. So sometimes we even make, I was saying in the group that we've tested it. When I say we, myself and my co-teacher, and we've set up situations where there was no way they didn't know the answer. It was nothing tricky. It was, here's the answer. Okay, and then we say, what's the answer? And no matter how long we sat and just and wait, or did different techniques, it's very, very hard to get anyone to speak in that situation. And Nigella kind of, to me, she brought up an interesting point where, of course, she mentioned culture. And although I know that the culture, along with some other factors, may be inhibiting, I think it made me think again that maybe I need to go back and actually reconsider all aspects that might contribute, including things like just culture. And then right at the end, I was also thinking maybe I just need to really do a lot of reflection. Like, in fact, even why am I insisting that they respond in that particular way? Is there anything wrong with them just responding in chat or with me calling their names? Why am I pushing it? So I started to sort of like, yeah, just reflect and try to question those things.
It can be quite confronting, can't it, to think about yourself in those situations, I think. Paul, how about your team? What was your group talking about? You're on mute, Paul.
Okay, Maria, would you like to talk a little bit about the differences between face-to-face and online and the socialization aspect of that?
Sure. Basically connected to what the talker, sorry, her name, I don't know her name just now, what Sharon was saying, sorry. Yes, and Shazia, with Shazia, we were talking about how what I've experienced in the classroom is that trying to build that community, feeling of community, that they belong, which is part of what they experience within the face-to-face learning experiences. So when they come online and they come in the class, they don't have that connection that they would naturally have face-to-face. So going and having their lunch and then connecting in that way, and then coming back and bringing that into the classroom. And that connectivity may relate to them then maybe not feeling comfortable in answering maybe, or in feeling like they are part of a safe space where they can engage. And so my thing would be definitely using the breakout rooms as a way for them to socialize all the time. And yeah, so that was one aspect of what we talked about. Shazia, you can maybe mention from your end.
Yeah, we just spoke a bit about the problems we faced and about the interests for action research, and it was great. Yep, that's it.
All right. Well, I'm gonna very briefly wrap up. So lovely to hear everyone's ideas. Like I said, my favorite thing to do in a workshop like this is actually just to get everyone else speaking. So I hope you found it really valuable. So where to next for more information? If you're looking for more information, either on action research generally, or specifically on the English Australia program, here are some places you can go. I'm sure you're already familiar with most of these. The EA website, first and foremost, the action research section. Everything else on this list, except our Facebook community, can be accessed there. The action research program summaries, which is what I used to talk to you about Ashley's project. Cambridge research notes, which is where the action research projects are written up in more detail. There are lots of action research projects written up in the English Australia Journal too. If you're not already a member of our Facebook community, please join us. We'd love to have you. And you're very welcome, of course, to contact one of us, the SIG conveners, or Sophie, and Sophie's put her email address in the chat as well. So with that, we've left about 30 seconds for questions. I'm really sorry. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask now? Maybe it was perfect timing. Okay, well.
Not a question, but a thank you for bringing.
Well, thank you. And yeah, thank you to Nat and Paul and to Sophie. Yeah, I've had a really good time this morning, so thank you. I always find it really inspiring coming together to talk to other teachers. Please take a look at those avenues for further information and get in touch with any one of us if you do have any questions. And thank you very much for coming, whatever time it is for you where you are right now, even the middle of the night, I know, for at least one person. Thank you, everyone.
And thanks Jenny, Paul and Nat for organising this session and running it as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
See you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.